If you are a Juventus fan and you live anywhere in the world and you're looking for content in English, welcome. My YouTube channel is in Italian, but I've committed to make a few videos a month in English to make sure that everybody is updated out there, especially all the Juventini out there, on what's going on with our favorite club. So please subscribe. Don't forget it's free, and then leave a like and a comment down below. I'm very curious to know what you think about the transfer market this year, and especially to build a community since I live in the US as well, and sometimes it's challenging to talk about Serie A or EPL or whatever, so it will be very interesting to build a community together. But let's talk about Juventus. So, Douglas Luiz, Nottingham Forest, it is official. We're only 11 days from the closing of the transfer window for what regard the summer transfer window before the winter one, which is normally in January. And finally, something is happening for Juventus. If you think about it, the last signee was Joao Mario, and we're talking about more or less a month ago. So that right back from Porto that arrived to Juventus, and actually in the last couple appearances that he did actually pretty well with a couple of assists. So in regard of Douglas Luiz, is going to be a loan with obligation to buy, and probably it will be triggered by the amount of presence, since this year has been pretty challenging for Douglas Luiz to stay fit, and also there has been other issues which we're going to talk about during this video, but it's going to be based on how many appearances the Brazilian midfielder will have with Nottingham Forest. The fee is said to be around 33 million euros, which, since it would be accounted for in 2026, will allow Juve to avoid a capital loss, which we know it's always very challenging, especially for Italian teams and especially in this historical time. To me, the conversation about Douglas Luiz is pretty difficult because I do believe that the blame for this failed relationship goes both ways. Juventus has part in it, and the player has part in it as well. Douglas last year came off from a very, very good season with 10 goals and 10 assists. I think it was a second only to Rodri, which, he had just won the Ballon d'Or the year prior. Well, that year, actually. It definitely showed up out of shape after the Copa America, but I also think that his management under Motta's and his staff, the former Juventus coach, was amateur, type of like amateurish handling of a player of that kind. Not every player has the same body, they don't have the same physiques, they don't need the same intensity, and especially, guys, it's very different what you see in Europe from what you see in the US in regard of training. Very different mentality. I'm not saying that one is better than the other one, I'm just saying they're very different, and some need some sort of like a personalized training plan. Instead, despite the investment, they didn't do enough to recover him from these injuries, and actually there has been a lot of misunderstanding. Sure, we can say that Douglas made mistakes too. I mean, the latest one was not showing up on time, where Juventus was coming back from the couple weeks vacation that they have after the Mondiale per Club. But honestly, he was completely pushed aside as soon as he made the first couple of mistakes with those couple of free kicks that he caused last year, in Serie A and in Champions League. If you know any Brazilian, which I do know because important, there is an amazing community that we can say hi to, awesome people, they truly struggle with transition. The famous saudade, like they say in Brazilian, which is kind of like the loss, the feeling of like despair when they are far away from home or far away from what they know best. So Douglas Luiz had many challenges. I mean, he came with a partner, Alicia Lehmann, which was acquired by the Juventus woman, and then the relationship ended, and I'm pretty sure that didn't help the Brazilian player either. And I know that we're not talking about soccer here, we're talking about something else, but I do believe that when you make an investment of that kind, and you invest 50 million euros in between the fixed part in cash and the two players that you gave to Aston Villa, at that point it's also your obligation to make sure that the player, is helped because sometimes it can be something very small that can completely help a relationship to reflourish, especially a relationship between, of course, like the team and the player in this case. And I don't think that Juventus can afford this type of approach anymore with their investments. And as I've said before, you have to push until the very end and make sure that you tried everything you can, because at the end of the day, the player the year after can, pack his bags and leave, but it's your risk to at the end have a loss and have wasted 1 year and have wasted money. And also I want to ask you, did Locatelli, McKennie, or Cobb Miners really perform better than Douglas Luiz? Do they have better qualities? I'm talking about better technique, better vision than Douglas Luiz. I don't really think so. But tell me what you think in the comments, because even if this relationship ended, I still think that Douglas Luiz is going to be one of those players that will be missed, on our team. Meanwhile, our captain, Manuel Locatelli, rejected a move to Saudi Arabia. The Saudi offered 25 million, and we know that Juventus was not even interested because that amount was definitely too low. And at the same time, the player was not didn't even consider to move to Saudi Arabia. He has a young kid, and many things are happening for him. He's also a captain of his favorite team, so it's very challenging. But like Romeo Gresti, the reported, which we say hi from Bianconero, which is a great YouTube channel, and they do an amazing work with journalism for the Bianconeri. So like he said, the team was ready to elevate their bid to probably 35 million with bonuses. But again, I do believe that Juventus is not interested because we're too late in the game for a sale, and the squad is not complete as it is, and the time is running out. So I don't think you're gonna go and sell easily a player like Locatelli 10 days before the beginning. Well, 11 days before the end of the transfer market and 3 days before the beginning of the Serie A. I don't think it makes much sense. And I do believe that if that offer had come at the beginning of the transfer market, maybe like in June, at that point, Juventus probably could have sat down with the Saudi and maybe discussed further this possibility. In the meantime, Matteo Moretto, which is a famous reporter that talks about, a lot of the transfer market, reports that Victor Boniface is very close to AC Milan. Milan and Bayer Leverkusen are discussing a loan with option to buy for the player, and the player also has already opened up to the move, which is a big deal. And you will say, why are you talking about Milan if this is a channel about Juventus? Well, because you know that Dusan Vlahovic has been, there has been a lot of talks about Dusan Vlahovic and Milan. So what does it mean for us and for Dusan Vlahovic? Because at the same time, I'm going to add another one. A lot of stuff happens at the end of the transfer market. Kai Havertz has suffered a bad knee injuries. Very sad for him because he just came out of another bad injury, and unfortunately he did injure again. We talk about possible, issue with the ligaments, so a long stop for him. And at this point, Arteta's Arsenal is going to have to go back to the drawing board and find an attacker. The risk is that they could make a move on Kolo Muani. Kolo Muani has been in standby with the Paris Saint-Germain because he said that he wants to play for Juventus again and, go back to a team that he has played for the last 6 months. But remember, it could leave us empty-handed if all of a sudden Arsenal puts on the plate 60 million cash for Kolo Muani, especially because we're almost at the end and there aren't many options left in regard of attacking players. Even for Dusan Vlahovic, this one is a pretty big risk because staying at Juventus as a second striker, let's say that Kolo Muani is not purchased, is one thing, because as you can see, last year we did start the season just with Dusan Vlahovic. The second striker should have been Milik, but he was injured for the entire season. So he ended up playing the whole season, but having two striker is mandatory and actually is bare minimum for a team that has two competition, actually three, with Coppa Italia, Campionato, and Champions League. I think Juventus needs to be very decisive right now, and especially since also Napoli is part of this whole conversation, because how all those little pieces of the puzzle could move is like, if Milan goes to Boniface, Napoli goes on Rasmus Højlund, and then at that point, you could have Arsenal going to Kolo Muani, and Juventus, at the end of the day, is going to have to probably face the music, as we say. As for Nico Gonzalez, since we've been talking about him as well a lot, Atletico Madrid is of course interested, but their bid is at this time too low. Remember, Juve paid a lot for the player last year from Fiorentina. There was a loan around 8 million euros with a bonus of 5, and plus there was another 25 with the right, the obligation to buy if he had met a certain type of criteria, and then the obligation was 25 million. So the entire operation was around 35, 38. So offering now, just 1 year after, 20 million is something that Juventus cannot accept. I would say that Juventus might be open to, see a little minus sign in the order of like 3 or 4 million, but definitely not like a 10, 15 million minus in front of this, transfer. So now I want to ask you, who should replace Douglas Luiz in the midfield? Who? What kind of player? Because now we're talking about Matt O'Reilly and we're talking about Zegrova, but those are two completely different players from Douglas Luiz, and they have a different position in the midfield because they play more as an attacking midfield and also sometimes right behind the striker. So tell me what you think about it. And then also, what do you think about Kolo Muani? At the end of the day, is he going to arrive, or is it going to be stolen away at the end of this crazy saga that we have been living this entire summer with Kolo Muani yes, Kolo Muani no? To wrap it up, since we've been talking about Juve for quite some time right now, and, I want to make sure that you don't get overwhelmed by all this information. Again, Romeo Agresti for Bianconero says that there is a possibility of contract termination with Artur. Artur, if you remember, has been with Juventus for quite some time with that crazy exchange between him and Miralem Pjanic with Barcelona. We're talking about 4 or 5 years ago. And we actually renewed the contract to spread wages, last year. So we renewed for another 2 years. So I think the end of the contract now for Artur Melo is 2027. And I think at this point, it might be a real option and probably the best option to terminate the contract because, the player has not been part of the squad for the past 3 or 4 years. So it doesn't make any sense to just keep him there and constantly find loans during the summer transfer. Let's stay positive, but honestly, I feel like we'll need to wait until next summer to see the kind of market that we really want for Juventus, or kind of like the one that we remember from Juventus. Many players will be out of contract or at the end of their contract, and Juventus will finally have more room to operate and more budget. They're going to have more cash. They're going to have more option and opportunity to actually buy the players that they want. For now, the league, guys, is about to start. The game is around the corner. Parma, as I said in the last video, is a very challenging opponent for us. Young team, young, also coach that has a lot to prove. And I think it's not going to be as easy as we think. So tell me, what is your idea of ideal formation for Sunday's game against Parma? And, we'll see what happens. We still have many surplus players, and I'm sure that in the next 10 days, the transfer market for Juventus, but for all the Italian team, is going to get hot. So please, leave a like, comment down below. Thank you, guys, and come sempre, as always, Forza Juve. Ciao.